Think you know everything about that iconic motorcycle chase in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade? The German motorcycle Harrison Ford rode wasn't German at all. It was Soviet-built in 1988, modified in Leeds, and cost more than a house when it sold at auction. From flagpoles that physics say shouldn't work to insurance policies designed for Sean Connery's safety, the truth behind this legendary two-wheeled escape is stranger than the film itself. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Indiana Jones' German World War II motorcycle. Fact 1. It was actually Ukrainian, not German. When you watch Indiana Jones and his father speeding away from the Nazis in the Last Crusade, you're supposed to believe they've stolen a genuine German military motorcycle from 1938. But here's the twist that even the most dedicated fans don't know. That motorcycle wasn't German at all, and it wasn't even built until 1988, exactly 50 years after the movie's setting. The bike Harrison Ford rode was actually a Ukrainian-built Dnieper MT-11 that rolled off the production line the same year filming took place, then got dressed up with paint and props to impersonate a World War II-era BMW 75. The production team needed motorcycles that looked authentically German but could handle the intense stunts and long shooting days required for the chase sequence. Finding actual BMW 75 motorcycles from the 1940s would have been incredibly difficult and expensive, not to mention risky, since these rare collector's items would need to survive crashes, jumps, and rough treatment during filming. So instead, the filmmakers turned to the Dnieper MT-11, which had a convenient advantage. It was designed as a descendant of Soviet motorcycles that were themselves based on copied German BMW technology from before the war. The Dnieper's engine layout and general appearance were close enough to the original BMW design that with some creative modifications, including spray-painted German military markings and period-appropriate accessories, it could convincingly pass as a 1930s Wehrmacht motorcycle on screen. The production team painted the bikes in military olive drab, added the distinctive white markings that German forces used, and attached authentic-looking sidecars to complete the illusion. For most viewers watching the film in theaters, the deception was absolutely perfect, and the Ukrainian origins of this supposedly German motorcycle remained one of Hollywood's best-kept secrets for years after the movie's release in 1989. Fact 2. It's based on a stolen German design. Here's the origin story that Hollywood never tells you about that motorcycle in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and it's a tale of Cold War intrigue that happened years before the cameras ever rolled. The bike that Harrison Ford commandeered to escape those Nazis wasn't just pretending to be German on screen. Its entire design was born from one of the most brazen acts of industrial espionage in motorcycle history. Back in 1940, the Soviet Union found itself facing a serious problem. The Red Army needed modern, reliable motorcycles that could handle the brutal Russian terrain and climate, but everything they had was based on outdated technology from the 1920s. Meanwhile, just across the border in Germany, BMW had created the R71, a robust motorcycle with an innovative oval tube frame that was perfect for hauling sidecars through rough conditions. The Soviets wanted that bike, but there was one major obstacle. They couldn't exactly walk into a BMW dealership and place an order for thousands of military motorcycles. So instead, according to widely documented accounts, Soviet agents covertly purchased 5 BMW 71 motorcycles through Swedish intermediaries. Sweden, being neutral, served as the perfect go-between for this clandestine transaction. Once those 5 motorcycles arrived in Moscow, Soviet engineers completely dismantled them, studying every single component down to the placement of the foot pegs. They reverse-engineered the entire design, creating molds and dies to reproduce the engines and gearboxes with exact precision. The result was the M72, a Soviet motorcycle that was essentially an identical copy of the German original. What makes this even more ironic is that these Soviet-built copies, which became the Dnieper and Ural motorcycle lines, would later be used by the Red Army to fight against the very Germans whose design they had stolen. And decades after that, one of these descendants, a 1988 Ukrainian Dnieper, would be dressed up to play a German motorcycle in a Hollywood blockbuster, coming full circle in the strangest possible way. Fact 3. The chase bikes were Japanese dirt bikes. When you watch the thrilling motorcycle chase in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, you see what appear to be authentic German military motorcycles from the 1930s pursuing Indy and his father through the Austrian countryside. But those menacing Nazi bikes roaring after Harrison Ford and Sean Connery weren't German at all, and they definitely weren't from World War II. They were actually 1979 Honda XL 500S trail bikes that had been cleverly disguised with period-looking equipment and German military logos to pass as vintage Wehrmacht motorcycles. The Honda XL 500S was a popular off-road motorcycle that Honda manufactured starting in the late 1970s, designed for dirt riding and trail use rather than military operations. These bikes were chosen for the chase sequence because they were lightweight, maneuverable, and capable of performing the dramatic stunts that Spielberg's team needed for the action-packed scene. Real German military motorcycles from the 1930s would have been far too valuable, rare, and fragile to use for the kind of high-speed crashes and jumps required during filming. The production team dressed up these modern Japanese dirt bikes with fake military equipment, German insignia, and period-appropriate accessories to make them look convincingly like they belonged in 1938. The modification work was extensive enough that most viewers never noticed they were watching motorcycles that were only about 10 years old at the time of filming, not 50-year-old military antiques. The lightweight nature of the Honda dirt bikes also made them perfect for the stunts where Nazi riders had to pop wheelies, chase at high speeds through rough terrain, and take dramatic spills when Indy and his father outwitted them during the escape. This choice to use modern motorcycles disguised as vintage machines was a practical filmmaking decision that allowed the stunt team to perform safely while still maintaining the visual authenticity that audiences expected from an Indiana Jones adventure. Fact 4. It was filmed in California, not Europe. Here's one of the strangest behind-the-scenes secrets about Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. That thrilling motorcycle chase where Indy and his father escape from the Nazis through the Austrian countryside wasn't filmed anywhere near Europe. The entire sequence was actually shot at Mount Tamalpais State Park in Marin County, Northern California, just north of San Francisco and close to George Lucas's Skywalker Ranch. What makes this even more unusual is that the motorcycle chase wasn't part of the original filming schedule at all. When director Steven Spielberg and editor Michael Kahn sat down to review a rough cut of the film in late 1988, they both felt something was missing. The movie needed more action to balance out the character moments between Harrison Ford and Sean Connery. So even though principal photography had wrapped back in September of 1988 after 123 days of filming, Spielberg decided to add an entirely new action sequence during post-production. The production team scouted locations near Skywalker Ranch and found the perfect spot at Mount Tamalpais State Park and nearby Fairfax. The rolling hills and winding roads of Northern California could easily double for the Austrian-German border region, where the scene was supposed to take place. This last-minute addition meant the crew had to quickly assemble period motorcycles, coordinate stunt riders, and capture one of the film's most memorable sequences under serious time pressure. If you watch the scene carefully, you can actually spot evidence that it was filmed separately from the rest of the movie. Harrison Ford's hair is noticeably longer in the motorcycle chase than it is in the scenes immediately before and after it, revealing that several months had passed between filming sessions. The production managed to pull off the illusion so well that most viewers never question whether they're actually watching the European countryside, when in reality, they're seeing the beautiful landscape of Northern California standing in for 1930s Austria. Fact 5. The scene was added as an afterthought. One of the most memorable action sequences in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade almost didn't exist at all, and it only made it into the film because Steven Spielberg realized something was missing after most of the movie was already done. When Spielberg and his longtime editor Michael Kahn sat down to watch a rough cut of the film in late 1988, they had a problem on their hands. The movie was supposed to be a thrilling adventure, but as they watched the footage they'd already shot, something felt off. There just wasn't enough excitement and action to keep audiences on the edge of their seats the way an Indiana Jones movie should. This was a serious concern because the production had already wrapped principal photography back in September of 1988 after 123 days of filming, and the crew had moved on to post-production work. But Spielberg knew that without more heart-pounding moments, the film wouldn't deliver the kind of experience fans expected from the franchise. So instead of just accepting what they had, Spielberg made the decision to go back and film an entirely new action sequence from scratch, even though it meant reassembling the cast and crew and finding new locations. That's when the motorcycle chase was born, shot during what was technically the post-production phase of the movie near Mount Tamalpais and Fairfax, which happened to be close to Skywalker Ranch in Northern California. This turned out to be one of the film's most iconic moments, with Indiana Jones and his father Henry escaping from the Nazis on a motorcycle with sidecar, complete with checkpoint crashes, flagpole stunts, and Sean Connery's hilariously disapproving reactions to his son's reckless driving. The sequence was literally one of the final pieces of the movie to be completed, added only because the filmmakers trusted their instincts that the movie needed more action, and it ended up becoming a scene that audiences would remember for decades. Fact 6. Some bikes were modified in Leeds, UK. When it came to preparing the motorcycles for the chase scene in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the production team had to think carefully about which bikes would be used for what purposes. And the solution they came up with reveals just how much planning goes into making a movie look authentic while keeping the stars safe. The production actually used two different types of motorcycles during filming, and they were prepared in two completely different locations on opposite sides of the Atlantic Ocean. The more expensive hero bikes, which were actual BMW motorcycles or close replicas, were dressed and modified in the United States to look like authentic World War II German military vehicles. These were the motorcycles that Harrison Ford and Sean Connery would actually ride in close-up shots and key scenes, and the reason they went through the trouble of using genuine BMWs for these moments was partly about historical accuracy, but mostly about insurance requirements. The insurance companies covering the production insisted that Ford and Connery ride on safer, more reliable motorcycles, so the production had to use better quality machines for any shots where the stars were actually on the bikes. But for the more dangerous stunts and distant shots where you couldn't really tell the difference, the production used what they called stunt bikes, which were actually Cossack motorcycles, a much cheaper Soviet-made alternative. These Cossack bikes were modified in a workshop in Leeds, England, and then shipped out to the various filming locations. The Leeds workshop apparently had experience modifying motorcycles for both the Last Crusade production and also for Raiders of the Lost Ark, which also featured sidecar motorcycles in some scenes. According to one forum post from 2008, the person who built these Cossacks for both Indiana Jones movies later went on to build custom bikes privately, showing that this kind of specialized movie vehicle work requires real expertise and craftsmanship that extends beyond just the film industry. Fact 7. It was a 1940s rental, not a 1988 model. Here's where things get really confusing about the motorcycle's actual origins. While most sources identify the hero bike as a 1988 Ukrainian-built Dnieper MT-11, official Lucasfilm production documents tell a completely different story. According to paperwork that came with one of the screen-used motorcycles when it was auctioned off, the bike was actually a 1940s period Naval motorcycle and sidecar that Lucasfilm rented for just 12 days, from February 6th to 17th, 1989. That's right. The production apparently rented an actual vintage motorcycle that was nearly 50 years old at the time of filming, not a newer Soviet-made replica. This creates a fascinating mystery because the rental dates themselves are unusual. Principal photography on The Last Crusade wrapped in September 1988, but according to these documents, Lucasfilm was still renting motorcycles in February of the following year. This lines up perfectly with what we know about the motorcycle chase being one of the absolute final sequences shot for the film, added during post-production when director Steven Spielberg felt the movie needed more action. The rental agreement specifically noted that Lucasfilm Limited would repaint and modify the motorcycle to their specifications for filming, which explains why an authentic 1940s bike could be transformed to look like a German military vehicle. What makes this even stranger is that multiple different motorcycles were clearly used during production. Some sources document the 1988 Dnieper, others mention this 1940s Nivelle, and still others reference BMWs and Cossacks that were modified in different locations. It's likely that the production used whatever period-appropriate motorcycles they could get their hands on, mixing and matching based on what each particular shot required. The 1940s Nivelle was probably chosen for close-up shots with the actors because it was more authentic-looking than the newer Soviet bikes, even though both were ultimately descendants of the same stolen German BMW design from World War II. Fact 8. The flagpole stunt defies physics. One of the most memorable moments in the motorcycle chase happens when Indiana Jones grabs an Austrian flagpole and jams it directly into the front wheel, spokes of a pursuing Nazi motorcycle, sending the bike and rider flying spectacularly into the air. It looks absolutely incredible on screen, but there's just one problem. Physics says it shouldn't work that way at all. In 2008, the popular science show Mythbusters decided to put this iconic stunt to the test, and what they discovered was pretty fascinating. The team built a mechanized rig that could fire a wooden flagpole at human-like speeds into the spinning wheel of a motorcycle traveling at 40 miles per hour, which matched the speed shown in the film. When they ran the test, the wooden pole simply snapped in half without stopping the bike at all, which immediately busted the myth. Not satisfied with that result, Adam and Jamie decided to try again using a steel pole instead of wood, figuring that a stronger material might produce different results. The steel pole did manage to stop the front wheel from spinning, but instead of the bike launching upward into a dramatic flip like in the movie, it just skidded forward with the front tire locked up and the rear wheel never leaving the ground. The Mythbusters team then took a closer look at the actual footage from The Last Crusade and noticed something revealing. In the close-up shot where the pole goes through the wheel, you can clearly see the wooden pole breaking into two pieces that start flying apart, which matches exactly what happened in their experiment. But then the film cuts to a wide shot showing the motorcycle flipping high into the air, and the team spotted telltale smoke around the bike that proved explosives were used to create the stunt. To demonstrate how the filmmakers actually achieved the effect, the Mythbusters built their own mortar device and successfully recreated the dramatic motorcycle flip using pyrotechnics, proving that movie magic, not real physics, made this unforgettable moment possible. Fact 9. It sold for over $138,000 at auction. If you ever wanted to own a piece of Indiana Jones history, you missed your chance in September of 2024, and it would have cost you a small fortune anyway. One of the actual screen-used motorcycles with sidecar from The Last Crusade went up for auction at Prop Store's Entertainment Memorabilia Live Auction in Los Angeles, and the final selling price absolutely shocked everyone involved. The bike had been estimated to sell for somewhere between $40,000 and $80,000, which already sounds like a lot of money for an old motorcycle that doesn't even run anymore. But when the hammer finally came down, the winning bid had reached over $138,000. That's more than double what the auction house expected, and it shows just how much collectors are willing to pay for genuine movie props from beloved films. The motorcycle that sold wasn't in pristine condition either, which makes the price tag even more remarkable. According to the auction listing, the bike was completely non-functional at the time of sale, meaning you couldn't actually ride it even if you wanted to. It came without keys, showed obvious signs of chip paint and grime buildup, had cut tubing in various places, and generally looked like it had been through exactly what it had been through, which was a violent chase scene involving Nazi soldiers and flagpoles being jammed into wheels. Despite all these issues, bidders clearly didn't care about the motorcycle's mechanical condition because what they were really buying was a direct connection to one of cinema's most memorable action sequences. The bike came with impressive documentation that helped justify the astronomical price. Included in the sale was an original California title from the early 1990s, plus a copy of an official Lucasfilm document that confirmed the rental of a 1940s period Neville motorcycle and sidecar from February 6th to 17th, 1989. The auction lot was also described as photo-matched, meaning experts had confirmed through careful comparison of production stills and film footage that this specific motorcycle appeared in close-up shots with Harrison Ford and Sean Connery during filming. Fact 10. It was modified for modern roads. After filming. After the cameras stopped rolling on Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the motorcycle that Harrison Ford and Sean Connery rode didn't just get shipped off to a warehouse and forgotten. Instead, someone made the decision to modify it so it could actually be driven on modern roads, which meant adding a bunch of parts that definitely weren't there during filming. The production team installed a completely new speedometer cluster where the original gauges had been, giving the bike a way to track speed that would work with contemporary road use. They also added a large running light in the spot where the passenger side fender used to be, which changed the whole look of the front end. A new brake light was mounted on the main rear tire cover to meet basic safety requirements, and they even added a second seat on the motorcycle itself, presumably so someone could ride it without needing to use the sidecar. On top of all that, a new rear spare tire was attached, replacing whatever setup had been used during the actual filming of the escape sequence. These modifications happened sometime after production wrapped, but before the bike started changing hands through collectors and auction houses. The changes were practical rather than cosmetic, focusing on making the motorcycle functional for someone who might actually want to ride it, rather than just display it as a piece of movie history. But here's the ironic part. Every single one of these additions made the bike less accurate to what audiences saw on screen. The speedometer cluster looks nothing like what a 1930s or 1940s military motorcycle would have had. The running light is completely out of place for the era. The second seat changes the silhouette that was so iconic in the film. By trying to make it roadworthy, someone essentially turned a piece of cinema history into something that looked less and less like the actual prop Ford and Connery used during that famous chase through the Austrian countryside, even though it was the exact same machine. Fact 11. The original license plate went missing. One of the small mysteries surrounding the Indiana Jones motorcycle is what happened to its original license plate after filming wrapped. During the actual chase sequence in The Last Crusade, the motorcycle featured a distinctive orange license plate mounted to its front wheel cover with black text that read KWI 723P. This plate was clearly visible in several shots as Indy and his father raced away from the Nazis, and it became part of the bike's authentic on-screen appearance. But somewhere between the end of production in 1989 and when the motorcycle eventually made its way to collectors and auction houses, that original license plate completely disappeared. When the screen-used motorcycle was offered at auction by Prop Store in 2024, the listing specifically noted that the license plate previously mounted to its front wheel cover during filming was no longer present on the bike. The auction catalog described the motorcycle in detail, documenting its chipped paint, cut tubing, and various modifications made after production, but the missing license plate stood out as one of the notable absent pieces. This wasn't just a case of the plate falling off during storage either, because the bike underwent several documented changes after filming, including the addition of new parts like a speedometer cluster and running lights to make it roadworthy for modern use. What makes this particularly interesting is that prop license plates from famous movie vehicles often become highly sought-after collectibles on their own. The fact that this specific plate vanished at some point raises questions about whether it was removed deliberately, perhaps taken as a souvenir by a crew member, or if it simply got lost during one of the bike's multiple ownership changes over the decades. Heritage Auctions sold another version of the bike that still had its orange license plate reading KWI 723P attached, which suggests that multiple motorcycles were used during filming and not all of them lost their plates. The missing piece remains an unsolved footnote in the motorcycle's journey from Hollywood prop to collector's item. Fact 12. Multiple period motorcycles were used. When you watch the thrilling motorcycle escape from Castle Brunwald in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, you're actually seeing several different motorcycles disguised as the same bike, a common Hollywood trick that most viewers never notice. The production team used multiple period motorcycles during filming of the chase sequence, which was one of the final scenes completed for the film near Mount Tamalpais in Northern California. While casual fans might assume Harrison Ford and Sean Connery rode the same motorcycle throughout the entire chase, the reality is that different bikes were strategically employed for different shots and stunts to ensure both safety and visual consistency. One particular motorcycle from this collection has been photo-matched to specific close-up moments featuring both Ford and Connery, making it especially valuable to collectors and film historians. This bike can be identified in several key shots from the chase, most notably including the dramatic moment when a German motorcyclist's front wheel actually rides up onto the Joneses' sidecar during the pursuit. The production crew carefully documented which bikes appeared in which scenes, and experts have since been able to trace the unique paint markings, wear patterns, and damage on individual motorcycles to match them to specific frames from the film. Using multiple motorcycles wasn't just about having backups in case one broke down during filming. Each bike served a particular purpose, with some designated for close-up shots with the actors, others used for more dangerous stunts with doubles, and still others employed for trailing behind camera angles that required different mounting configurations. The bike that's been photo-matched to Ford and Connery's close-ups is considered the hero motorcycle, meaning it's the one that appeared most prominently on screen with the stars actually visible. This same bike later appeared at auction with documentation proving its screen-used status, including production paperwork from Lucasfilm confirming the rental period and modifications made specifically for filming. Fact 13. The Soviet design fought against its Nazi inspiration. Here's one of the most ironic twists in movie prop history. The motorcycle that's supposed to represent Nazi Germany in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is actually descended from a Soviet military design that fought against the Nazis during World War II. The Dnieper motorcycle used in the film wasn't just pretending to be German. It was actually based on technology that the Soviet Union reverse-engineered from German BMW motorcycles in 1940, then used extensively on the Eastern Front against the very forces it's portraying on screen. The story goes back to the eve of World War II, when the Soviet Union realized they needed a reliable military motorcycle to match what the Germans had developed. According to official accounts, Soviet officials covertly purchased 5 BMW R-71 motorcycles through Swedish intermediaries to avoid raising suspicions. Soviet engineers in Moscow completely dismantled all 5 bikes, studying every detail and creating molds and dies to produce an exact copy. The result was the M72, which began production in 1941 and became the backbone of Soviet motorcycle forces throughout the war. This design eventually evolved into the Dnieper line of motorcycles that continued production well into the 1980s. So when the filmmakers needed a period-accurate German military motorcycle for The Last Crusade, they ended up using a 1988 Dnieper MT-11, a direct descendant of those Soviet copies. The production team dressed it up with German military markings and equipment to make it look like a BMW R75. But underneath all that movie magic was a Ukrainian-built Soviet design. This means that on screen, Harrison Ford and Sean Connery are being chased by Nazis riding what are essentially Soviet motorcycles, pretending to be the German originals that the Soviets had copied nearly 50 years earlier. It's like a historical hall of mirrors, where the hunter becomes the hunted, and the copy pretends to be the original it was stolen from. Fact 14. Harrison Ford's hair reveals late filming. If you watch Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade closely, there's a visual clue hiding in plain sight that reveals when the motorcycle chase was actually filmed. Harrison Ford's hair is noticeably longer during the entire chase sequence compared to the scenes that come right before and right after it, and this wasn't a continuity error that slipped past the filmmakers. It's direct evidence that the motorcycle chase was shot several months after the rest of the movie wrapped. Principal photography on The Last Crusade officially ended on September 16, 1988, after 123 days of filming. But when director Steven Spielberg and editor Michael Kahn sat down to watch a rough cut of the film later that year, they both felt something was missing. The escape from Castle Brunwald, where Indy rescues his father, felt too short and lacked the kind of extended action sequence that fans expected from an Indiana Jones movie. So Spielberg made the decision to go back and film an entirely new chase scene, even though the production had already officially wrapped. The motorcycle chase was shot during post-production at Mount Tamalpais and near Fairfax, both locations close to Skywalker Ranch in Northern California. By the time the crew reassembled for this additional filming, several months had passed since Ford had last played Indiana Jones. During that time, his hair had grown longer, and there wasn't enough time to get it trimmed back to match the exact length it had been during the castle scenes. The result is a subtle but noticeable difference that sharp-eyed viewers can spot. In the scenes inside Castle Brunwald and immediately after the escape, Ford's hair is shorter and more neatly trimmed. But once the motorcycle chase begins, his hair is visibly longer and slightly shaggier. The difference becomes especially apparent when you watch the sequence where Indy and his father stop at the crossroads and argue about going to Berlin. Ford's hair is clearly longer than it was just moments earlier in the story's timeline. This hair continuity break serves as a permanent reminder that one of the film's most memorable action sequences was actually a last-minute addition to beef up the movie's excitement. Fact 15. It had a machine gun that wasn't there. Here's one of the strangest details that came to light when screen-used motorcycles from Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade started showing up at auctions decades after the film wrapped. According to the Wikipedia entry on the movie's production and official auction documentation from Prop Store, the Dnieper motorcycle that Harrison Ford and Sean Connery rode actually came equipped with a machine gun pintle mount on the sidecar, which was a standard feature on these Soviet military bikes. The pintle is basically a mounting post designed to hold a machine gun, so the passenger in the sidecar can provide covering fire while the bike is moving. It sounds incredibly authentic for a World War II-era German military motorcycle, and you'd think the production team would be thrilled to have such a realistic detail already built into the prop. But here's where it gets weird. Despite having this genuine military hardware attached to the sidecar, the film's art department chose not to actually mount a real or replica machine gun on it during filming. Instead, production documents confirm that the entire motorcycle was simply dressed with spray-painted white markings to make it look more German and period-appropriate. The white paint was meant to mimic the identifying marks that Nazi forces used on their vehicles, but the machine gun mount itself was apparently left empty or minimally decorated. This creates a fascinating contradiction where the motorcycle had the actual mounting hardware from real military use, complete with all the mechanical components needed to support a heavy weapon. But the filmmakers decided that painting some white crosses and numbers on the bodywork was more important than adding what would have been one of the most visually striking and authentic details. The auction listings for these motorcycles specifically mention the machine gun pintle as part of the original equipment, and you can see the mounting point in behind-the-scenes photographs, just sitting there unused while the paint department focused on superficial markings instead.